Mary Thompson clutched her worn leather portfolio as she stepped off the elevator on the 32nd floor of Sterling Marketing Solutions in downtown Chicago. The marble floors gleamed under the harsh fluorescent lights, and the sound of her modest heels echoed through the pristine hallway. At 26, Mary had worked her way up from a small-town girl from Wisconsin to landing what she thought was her dream job at one of the city's most prestigious marketing firms. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. "You're late again, Thompson," snapped Victoria Blackwood, the regional director, as Mary hurried past her office. Victoria's perfectly manicured nails tapped impatiently against her mahogany desk, her ice-blue eyes scanning Mary from head to toe with obvious disdain. "And what is that outfit supposed to be? This is a professional environment, not a thrift store." Mary glanced down at her navy blazer and simple black skirt, the nicest clothes she owned. "I'm sorry, Miss Blackwood. The train was delayed this morning due to construction on the—" "I don't want to hear excuses," Victoria interrupted, rising from her chair with fluid grace. Everything about Victoria screamed wealth and privilege, from her designer Chanel suit to the diamond tennis bracelet that caught the light as she gestured dismissively. "You've been with us for 6 months, and frankly, your performance has been mediocre at best." Mary's heart sank, but she forced herself to maintain composure. "Actually, ma'am, the Henderson campaign I worked on last month exceeded protected engagement by 43%, and the client specifically requested—" "Anyone could have handled the Henderson account," Victoria waved her hand dismissively. "It was practically designed to succeed. What I'm concerned about is your lack of polish, your inability to fit in with our clientele. This company caters to the elite of Chicago, Mary. Our clients expect a certain standard." The words stung more than Mary cared to admit. She had worked 2 jobs to put herself through state school, graduating summa cum laude with a degree in marketing and communications. Every position she'd held before this one had praised her creativity, work ethic, and results. But here at Sterling, it seemed like none of that mattered if you didn't have the right pedigree. "I understand your concerns," Mary replied carefully, "but I believe my work speaks for itself. The Morrison Group renewal was entirely due to the social media strategy I developed, and—" "The Morrison Group renewal was a team effort," Victoria cut her off again, her voice growing colder. "And before you get too comfortable thinking you're indispensable, let me remind you that this industry is about relationships, Mary, connections, trust, things that can't be taught in some public university classroom." Mary felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment and anger. She opened her mouth to respond, but Victoria wasn't finished. "I've been in this business for 15 years, Victoria continued, circling around her desk like a predator stalking prey. "I've seen dozens of girls like you come and go, small-town dreamers who think they can make it in the big city on talent alone. But talent without breeding, without connections, without the right background, it's worthless." The office had gone eerily quiet. Mary could sense other employees pretending to work while straining to listen to the conversation. She felt exposed, humiliated, but tried to maintain her dignity. "Miss Blackwood, I respectfully disagree. Merit should speak louder than—" "Merit?" Victoria laughed, a harsh sound that echoed off the glass walls. "Sweetheart, this isn't a charity. This is business. And in business, image is everything. When I take clients to dinner at the Peninsula or host them at the Chicago Yacht Club, I need team members who can hold their own in those environments, people who understand how to navigate high society." Mary's hands trembled slightly as she gripped her portfolio tighter. She thought about her grandmother's medical bills, the student loans that kept her awake at night, the tiny studio apartment she could barely afford even with her salary from Sterling. This job wasn't just her career, it was her lifeline. "I can learn," Mary said quietly. "I can adapt. I've always been a quick study." Victoria's expression softened for just a moment, almost pitying. Oh, honey, you can't learn this. It's not about studying harder or working longer hours. It's about being born into the right family, attending the right schools, having the right last name. It's about inheriting connections that take generations to build. The cruel words hung in the air like smoke. Mary felt something inside her crack, but she refused to let Victoria see her break. Now, Victoria said, returning to her desk and shuffling through some papers, I need you to handle the Riverside Community Center account. It's a small nonprofit trying to renovate their facility. Pro bono work, naturally. There should be more your speed. Mary stared at the file Victoria handed her. After months of being excluded from major campaigns, relegated to busy work, and watching less qualified but better connected colleagues get promoted around her, this felt like the final insult. A community center? Asked, trying to keep the hurt out of her voice. It's good experience, Victoria replied without looking up. Plus, it's the kind of work that might actually make a difference in your demographic. Consider it a perfect match. The condescension in Victoria's tone was unmistakable. Mary felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes, but she blinked them back furiously. She wouldn't give Victoria the satisfaction of her cry. I'll get started on it right away, managed to say. Good. And Mary, Victoria looked up with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Try to remember that not everyone is cut out for this level of success. There's no shame in knowing your limitations. Mary nodded stiffly and walked back to her small desk in the corner of the open office space. Around her, conversations resumed, but she could feel the mixture of pity and relief from her coworkers. Pity for her humiliation, relief that they were the ones in Victoria's crosshairs. She sat down heavily in her chair and opened the Riverside Community Center file. The photos showed a rundown building in a working-class neighborhood, not unlike the one where she'd grown up. The center served underprivileged kids, offering after-school programs, job training, and a safe place for families to gather. Despite Victoria's dismissive attitude, Mary found herself genuinely interested in their mission. As she read through the materials, her phone buzzed with a text from her best friend Jessica. "Coffee tonight? You sound stressed in your last message." Mary quickly typed back, "Rain check, I have to work late on a new project." It wasn't entirely a lie. She did plan to stay late, but more because she dreaded going home to her empty apartment, where she'd inevitably replay Victoria's words over and over. At least here, surrounded by the hum of office activity, she could lose herself in work. The afternoon dragged on, and one by one, her colleagues began leaving for the day. Victoria swept past Mary's desk at exactly 5:30, her heels clicking authoritatively against the floor. "Don't stay too late," Victoria called over her shoulder. "The building's security gets nervous about people working after hours, especially people they don't recognize." Even Victoria's attempts at casual conversation felt like veiled insults. Mary watched her boss disappear into the elevator, then let out a long breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. By 7 o'clock, the office was nearly empty, except for the cleaning crew and a few dedicated workaholics. Mary had made significant progress on the community center proposal, finding herself genuinely excited about the possibilities for their campaign. For the first time in months, she felt like she was doing work that mattered, even if Victoria considered it beneath her notice. As she packed up her things, Mary caught her reflection in the dark window. She saw a young woman with intelligent brown eyes, shoulder-length auburn hair that she'd carefully styled that morning, and a face that, while pretty, bore the stress lines of someone carrying too much weight on their shoulders. Victoria's words echoed in her mind. Not everyone is cut out for this level of success. Maybe Victoria was right. Maybe she was fooling herself, thinking she could compete in this world of privilege and connections. Maybe it was time to accept her limitations and find somewhere she actually belonged. But as Mary gathered her coat and headed for the elevator, a small spark of defiance flickered in her chest. She thought about the community center, about the kids who needed advocates, about all the small-town dreamers who deserved better than to be dismissed because of their zip code or their parents' bank account. Tomorrow, she decided, she would prove Victoria wrong. She just had to figure out how. 3 days later, Mary found herself standing outside the Riverside Community Center in the heart of Chicago's South Side. The October wind whipped through her hair as she studied the weathered brick building that would be her project for the foreseeable future. Unlike the gleaming towers of the business district, this neighborhood felt real, lived in, authentic. The center's director, Patricia Morales, greeted Mary with a warm smile and calloused hands that spoke of years of hard work. "You must be from Sterling Marketing. I have to admit, I was surprised when they said they'd take on our account pro bono." Mary shook Patricia's hand, immediately feeling more at ease than she had in months at her own office. "I'm Mary Thompson. I'm excited to learn more about what you do here." As Patricia led her through the facility, Mary was struck by the stark contrast to her usual work environment. Instead of marble and mahogany, the center featured colorful murals painted by local teenagers, mismatched furniture that had been donated and lovingly maintained, and the cheerful chaos of children's laughter echoing from various program rooms. "We serve about 300 families in this neighborhood," Patricia explained, gesturing toward a computer lab where teenagers were working on coding projects. After-school programs, GED classes, job training, even a small food pantry. This building has been our home for 22 years, but the city wants to sell the block to developers. Mary's marketing mind immediately began working. "What's your timeline for the renovation campaign?"
A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. 6 weeks, Patricia said with a rueful smile. "We need to raise $2 million to buy the building outright and fund the renovations. I know it sounds impossible, but this place is a lifeline for so many families. We can't let it disappear." As they toured the facility, Mary met some of the regular attendees. There was Miguel, a 17-year-old working toward his GED while caring for his younger siblings. Sarah, a single mother learning computer skills to transition from retail work. Mr. Johnson, a 70-year-old volunteer who taught chess to anyone willing to learn. For the first time since starting at Sterling, Mary felt connected to her work's real-world impact. These weren't abstract engagement metrics or brand awareness percentages. These were actual people whose lives could be changed by effective marketing. After the tour, Mary sat in a small cafe across the street, laptop open, sketching out preliminary campaign ideas. She was so absorbed in her work that she didn't notice the tall figure approaching her table until a rich, warm voice interrupted her thoughts. "Excuse me, is this seat taken?" Mary looked up to find herself staring into the most striking pair of green eyes she'd ever seen. The man standing beside her table was probably in his early 30s, with dark hair slightly tousled by the wind and an easy smile that made her heart skip unexpectedly. He wore a simple black sweater and jeans, casual clothes that somehow looked expensive without being flashy. "Oh, no," Mary stammered, quickly closing her laptop. "Please, go ahead." "Thanks. I'm Daniel, by the way, Daniel Rivers." He extended his hand, and when Mary shook it, she noticed his grip was firm but gentle, his fingers long and graceful. "Mary Thompson," she replied, hoping her voice sounded steadier than she felt. Daniel settled into the chair across from her, and Mary couldn't help but notice how he seemed completely comfortable in the modest neighborhood cafe. There was something unpretentious about him that she found refreshing after months of dealing with Sterling's status-conscious clientele. "Are you from around here?" Daniel asked, nodding toward the window that overlooked the community center. "No, I'm actually working on a project across the street, marketing campaign, for the Riverside Community Center. They're trying to raise funds to save the building." Daniel's expression shifted, becoming more serious and attentive. "Patricia Wallace runs that place, right? She's incredible. The work they do there is really remarkable." Mary was surprised by his familiarity with the center. "You know Patricia?" "I volunteer there sometimes," Daniel said, though something in his tone suggested there was more to the story. "Teaching business skills to some of the job training participants. What kind of marketing approach are you planning?" For the next hour, Mary found herself in the most engaging conversation she'd had in months. Daniel asked thoughtful questions about her campaign strategy, offered insights about the community's needs, and shared stories about the center's impact that gave her campaign ideas she never would have considered from her desk at Sterling. What struck her most was how he listened, really listened to her ideas without interrupting or dismissing them. When she mentioned her background in small-town Wisconsin, he didn't look down on her. When she talked about her passion for socially conscious marketing, he didn't roll his eyes or change the subject. You know, Daniel said as their conversation began winding down, there's a fundraising gala next Friday for the Chicago Children's Foundation. It's not directly related to the community center, but a lot of potential donors will be there, people who might be interested in supporting Patricia's cause. Mary's interest was piqued, but she also felt a familiar pang of insecurity. That sounds amazing, but I'm not sure I'd fit in at that kind of event. Why wouldn't you fit in? Daniel asked, genuine confusion in his voice. Mary hesitated, then decided to be honest. Let's just say I'm more comfortable in places like this cafe than at charity galas with Chicago's elite. Daniel leaned back in his chair, studying her face with an expression she couldn't quite read. You know, some of the most interesting people I've met have been the ones who don't think they belong at those events, the ones who actually care about making a difference instead of just being seen. There was something in his tone that made Mary wonder about his own relationship with Chicago's social scene, but before she could probe further, her phone buzzed with a text from Victoria. Status update on community center project, my first thing Monday morning. Work calling? Daniel asked, noticing her expression. Something like that, Mary sighed. My boss isn't exactly thrilled with this assignment. Sounds like your boss doesn't recognize a good opportunity when she sees one, Daniel said. The community center project could be a real portfolio piece, the kind of work that shows you can create meaningful impact, not just pretty presentations. Mary was touched by his confidence in her abilities. It had been so long since someone had spoken to her work with genuine respect. I should probably go, Mary said, reluctantly, gathering her things. But this was really helpful. Thank you for the insights about the community. Actually, Daniel said, standing as she prepared to leave, would you like to grab dinner sometime this week? I know a few more places in the city where the focus is on good conversation instead of showing off. Mary felt her cheeks warm. She couldn't remember the last time someone had asked her out, especially someone who seemed genuinely interested in getting to know her rather than just passing time. I'd like that, she said, surprising herself with how quickly she responded. They exchanged numbers, and as Daniel walked away, Mary noticed several things about him that hadn't registered during their conversation. His clothes, while casual, were clearly well-made. His watch, though understated, looked expensive. The way he carried himself suggested confidence that came from more than just good posture. But what struck her most was how none of that had mattered during their conversation. He had treated her as an equal, valued his ideas, and seemed genuinely interested in her thoughts, rather than trying to impress her with his own credentials. As Mary walked back to her car, she found herself smiling for the first time in weeks. Maybe Victoria was wrong about her limitations. Maybe there were people in this city who valued substance over status, who saw potential instead of pedigree. She had no idea that her chance encounter with Daniel Rivers was about to change everything she thought she knew about power, success, and where she truly belonged. Mary arrived at Sterling Marketing on Monday morning with renewed energy, her weekend dinner with Daniel still fresh in her mind. They had spent 3 hours at a cozy Italian restaurant in Little Italy, talking about everything from their favorite books to their wildest travel dreams. Daniel had been charming, funny, and refreshingly normal, nothing like the pretentious men she occasionally encountered through work. What surprised her most was how he had insisted on hearing about her ideas for the community center campaign. By the end of the evening, she had filled half a napkin with notes based on his suggestions about potential corporate sponsors and community partnerships. Thompson, Victoria's sharp voice cut through Mary's pleasant memories. My office, now. Mary grabbed her laptop and the preliminary campaign materials she had prepared over the weekend. Victoria's office felt even more intimidating than usual, with its floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Chicago skyline and an intimidating collection of industry awards lining the walls. So, Victoria said without preamble, tell me about this little charity project of yours.
Mary launched into her presentation, outlining her strategy for the Riverside Community Center campaign. She explained her research into similar successful fundraising efforts, her analysis of the target demographic, and her multi-platform approach combining traditional media with grassroots community engagement. Interesting, Victoria said when Mary finished, though her tone suggested she found it anything but interesting. And how exactly do you plan to measure success? Engagement metrics? Click-through rates? Brand awareness percentages? Well, the primary metric would be actual donations raised, Mary replied carefully. But I've also developed benchmarks for community engagement, volunteer signups, and media coverage that could— Mary, Victoria interrupted with a patronizing smile. You're missing the bigger picture here. This isn't about the community center. This is about Sterling's reputation. When we take on pro bono work, it's for the optics, not the outcomes. Mary felt her stomach drop. I'm not sure I understand. Victoria leaned back in her leather chair, studying Mary like a scientist examining a particularly interesting specimen. The point of charity work is to make Sterling look good to potential clients. We need photos of our team at the fundraising events, quotes in the society pages, maybe a nice award from the mayor's office. The actual success of the campaign is secondary. But if we don't actually help them raise the money they need, they'll lose the building, Mary protested. And that would be unfortunate, Victoria agreed with theatrical sympathy. But it wouldn't be our responsibility. We're marketing consultants, not miracle workers. The important thing is that Sterling can point to our involvement in the project when we're pitching to other clients. Mary felt sick. She thought about Patricia Morales, about Miguel working toward his GED, about all the families who depended on the community center. What if I could guarantee the campaign's success? What if I could bring in donors who would not only support the center, but also become potential clients for Sterling? Victoria's eyebrows rose slightly. And how exactly would you accomplish that? Mary thought about Daniel, about his obvious familiarity with Chicago's philanthropic community, about his suggestion that she attend the Children's Foundation Gala. I've made some connections through my research, people who care about community development and have the resources to make a real difference. Connections? Victoria's voice took on a dangerous edge. Mary, I thought we had discussed your limitations in this area. You don't have connections. You don't have access to the kind of people who write six-figure checks to charity. Maybe not traditionally, Mary said, trying to project more confidence than she felt, but sometimes fresh approaches work better than the same old strategies. Victoria was quiet for a long moment, and Mary could practically see the calculations happening behind her cold blue eyes. Finally, she spoke. Fine. I'll give you 2 weeks to prove that your fresh approach can produce results. But understand this. If you fail, if you embarrass Sterling in front of potential clients, this will be your last project with us. Mary's heart pounded, but she nodded. I understand. Good. And Mary, don't think this conversation changes anything about your position here. Success on one charity case doesn't erase months of mediocre performance. As Mary left Victoria's office, she realized she had just committed to something that could either save her career or end it completely. She pulled out her phone and scrolled to Daniel's number, hesitating only briefly before typing, "Any chance you're free for coffee today? I could use some advice about the fundraising strategy." His response came within minutes. Absolutely. Millennium Park Cafe at 2. Mary spent the morning refining her campaign materials, but her concentration kept drifting to her upcoming meeting with Daniel. There was something about him that didn't quite add up. His expensive watch, his obvious knowledge of Chicago's charity circuit, the way he had talked about business strategy with the fluency of someone who understood corporate dynamics from the inside. When she arrived at the cafe, Daniel was already there, sitting at a corner table with 2 cups of coffee and what appeared to be a folder of documents. He stood when he saw her, and Mary noticed again how he moved with the kind of natural confidence that suggested he was used to being in charge. "Rough morning?" he asked, noticing her expression. "You could say that," Mary replied, settling into the chair across from him. "My boss basically just told me that this campaign is a test of whether I deserve to keep my job." Daniel's expression darkened. That seems like an unnecessarily high-pressure situation for what should be a collaborative effort to help the community. "Welcome to the world of corporate marketing," Mary said with a bitter laugh. Everything is about optics and client relationships. The actual mission is secondary. What if it didn't have to be? Daniel asked quietly. Mary looked up from her coffee, surprised by the intensity in his voice. What do you mean? Daniel opened the folder he had brought and slid several documents across the table. I've been thinking about our conversation on Friday, about the challenges the community center is facing. I might know some people who would be interested in supporting the cause. Mary examined the papers Daniel had given her. They appeared to be contact information for various Chicago business leaders, complete with notes about their philanthropic interests and preferred donation levels. The detail was impressive and somewhat puzzling. How do you have all this information? Mary asked. Daniel seemed to hesitate for a moment before answering. I told you I volunteer with business training programs. Part of that involves connecting with potential mentors and sponsors. You build relationships in this city. You learn who cares about what causes. It was a reasonable explanation, but something in his tone suggested there was more to the story. Mary decided not to push. She needed all the help she could get, and Daniel seemed genuinely committed to helping the community center succeed. This is incredible, Mary said, scanning the list of names. She recognized several from the society pages, wealthy philanthropists known for supporting education and community development causes. But I have to ask, why are you helping me with this? We barely know each other. Daniel was quiet for a moment, and Mary thought she saw something vulnerable flash across his features. Let's just say I have personal reasons for wanting to see projects like this succeed. Not everyone who has resources uses them responsibly. It's refreshing to meet someone who genuinely wants to make a difference. There was something in his voice that made Mary suspect he was speaking from experience, perhaps painful experience. She wanted to ask more, but Daniel had already moved on to strategy. As they worked through the campaign plan together, Mary found herself increasingly impressed by Daniel's business acumen. He understood market positioning, donor psychology, and media strategy with a sophistication that seemed unusual for someone who claimed to be a volunteer business trainer. You know, Mary said as they prepared to leave, you seem to know a lot about high-level marketing strategy for someone who teaches basic business skills. Daniel's smile was enigmatic. I had some interesting experiences over the years. Sometimes the best education comes from watching other people make mistakes. As they parted ways outside the cafe, Mary felt both grateful and puzzled. Daniel was clearly more than he appeared to be, but she couldn't figure out what he was hiding or why. All she knew was that for the first time since starting at Sterling, she felt like she had a real chance at success. What she didn't realize was that her mysterious new ally was about to turn her understanding of power and influence completely upside down. The ballroom at the Pullman House Hilton glittered with crystal chandeliers and the soft murmur of Chicago's elite mingling over champagne and canapés. Mary stood at the entrance of the Children's Foundation Gala, feeling like an imposter in her single black dress, the nicest thing in her closet, but clearly modest compared to the designer gowns flowing around her. Daniel had arranged for her to attend as his guest, though she still wasn't entirely sure how he had managed to secure tickets to what was obviously one of the city's most exclusive charity events. When she had questioned him about it, he had simply smiled and said he knew someone on the planning committee. "You look beautiful," Daniel said, appearing at her elbow with 2 glasses of champagne. He wore a perfectly tailored black tuxedo that transformed him from the casually dressed volunteer she had come to know into someone who looked like he belonged among Chicago's power elite. "I feel like everyone can tell I don't belong here," Mary admitted, accepting the champagne gratefully. "Trust me," Daniel said, his green eyes scanning the crowd with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Half the people here don't belong either. The difference is they're better at pretending." As they moved through the crowd, Mary was amazed by how easily Daniel navigated the social dynamics. He seemed to know exactly who to approach, which conversations to join, and how to gracefully extract them when discussions became tedious. More importantly, he had an uncanny ability to steer conversations toward community development and educational funding, perfect openings for Mary to mention the Riverside Community Center. Daniel, a silver-haired woman in an elegant emerald gown, approached them with open arms.
I was hoping you'd be here tonight. It's been far too long. Margaret, you look radiant as always, Daniel replied, kissing her cheek with the kind of familiarity that spoke of long acquaintance. I'd like you to meet Mary Thompson. Mary, this is Margaret Henley, one of Chicago's most dedicated philanthropists. Margaret's eyes lit up with genuine warmth as she shook Mary's hand. Any friend of Daniel's is a friend of mine. What brings you to our little gathering? Mary launched into her carefully prepared pitch about the community center, watching Margaret's expression grow increasingly interested. By the time she finished describing the center's programs and their fundraising goals, Margaret was already reaching for her phone. I absolutely must introduce you to Robert Chen, Margaret said, scrolling through her contacts. He runs the Chen Foundation, and they're always looking for grassroots organizations to support. Daniel, you clever boy, where did you find this delightful young woman? She found me, actually, Daniel replied, and Mary noticed something tender in his expression that made her heart skip. Over the next hour, Daniel introduced Mary to a parade of potential donors. Each conversation felt natural, unforced, and Mary began to realize that Daniel wasn't just well-connected, he was genuinely respected by these people. They listened to him, trusted his judgment, and seemed to value his opinion on charitable causes. How do you know all these people? Mary asked, during a brief moment when they found themselves alone at a table overlooking the dance floor. Daniel was quiet for a moment, swirling his champagne thoughtfully. Chicago's philanthropic community is smaller than you might think. When you're involved in enough causes, you start running into the same faces at different events. It was another vague answer, and Mary was beginning to recognize the pattern. Every time she asked Daniel about his background or connections, he deflected with charm and generalities. She was starting to suspect that her mysterious dinner companion was hiding something significant. Mary Thompson, a familiar voice cut through her thoughts like a blade. Victoria Blackwood materialized beside their table, resplendent in a blood-red gown that probably cost more than Mary's monthly rent. What a surprise to see you here! Mary's stomach dropped. She had hoped to avoid any Sterling colleagues at the gala, knowing that Victoria would find some way to turn her attendance into ammunition for future criticism. Ms. Blackwood, Mary said, standing politely, I didn't realize you'd be here tonight. The Children's Foundation is one of Sterling's most important client relationships, Victoria replied, her eyes scanning Mary's modest dress with obvious disdain. I'm surprised you could afford a ticket. These events aren't exactly budget-friendly. Mary felt heat rise in her cheeks, but before she could respond, Daniel stood and extended his hand to Victoria with a charming smile. You must be Mary's colleague, he said smoothly. I'm Daniel Rivers. It's a pleasure to meet you. Victoria's demeanor shifted immediately upon seeing Daniel. Her predatory smile softened into something approaching genuine warmth as she took in his obvious wealth and sophistication. Victoria Blackwood, regional director at Sterling Marketing, she purred, holding his hand a fraction longer than necessary. And you are? Just a friend, Daniel replied modestly. Mary was telling me about the wonderful work Sterling does with nonprofit organizations. It sounds like you have quite an impressive operation. Victoria preened under the attention. We do pride ourselves on our charitable partnerships, though I have to say, some of our team members are more suited to this level of client interaction than others. The barb was clearly aimed at Mary, but Daniel either didn't catch the insult or chose to ignore it. Mary's been fascinating to talk to about community development strategies. She has some really innovative ideas about grassroots fundraising. Does she now? Victoria's smile turned razor sharp. Well, innovation is certainly valuable, though experience and established relationships tend to produce more reliable results in our industry. Mary watched the exchange with growing embarrassment. Victoria was clearly trying to undermine her in front of Daniel, while simultaneously positioning herself as the more suitable companion for someone of his obvious social standing. Speaking of established relationships, Victoria continued, moving slightly closer to Daniel, I don't believe I recognize you from the usual charity circuit. Are you new to Chicago's philanthropic scene? Something flickered across Daniel's expression, so quickly that Mary almost missed it. For just a moment, he looked less like the charming dinner companion he had come to know, and more like someone accustomed to being recognized, someone surprised by anonymity. I try to keep a low profile, Daniel said carefully. I find charity work is more effective when it's not about personal recognition. Victoria laughed, a sound like wind chimes in a storm. How refreshingly modest. Though I have to say, with your obvious resources, you could probably make quite an impact if you chose to be more visible in the community. Mary wanted to disappear. Victoria was practically throwing herself at Daniel while simultaneously dismissing Mary as irrelevant. It was mortifying to watch her boss transform into a different person entirely in the presence of obvious wealth and status. Actually, Daniel said, his voice taking on a cooler tone, I find that the most meaningful philanthropic work often comes from people who understand the communities they're trying to help. People like Mary, who approach charity work with genuine passion rather than social obligation.
Victoria's smile faltered slightly, but she recovered quickly. Of course, passion is important, but passion without resources and connections can only accomplish so much. That's where people like us come in, Daniel replied, and Mary noticed that he had positioned himself slightly closer to her, creating a subtle but clear alliance. Those of us with resources have a responsibility to support people who have the vision and dedication to create real change. The conversation continued for a few more minutes, but Mary barely heard it. She was too busy trying to process Daniel's words and behavior. The way he had said people like us when referring to those with resources, the way Victoria had immediately recognized him as someone worth courting, the way he seemed completely comfortable in this world of wealth and influence. As Victoria finally excused herself to network with other key donors, Mary turned to Daniel with questions burning in her eyes. "We should dance," Daniel said before she could speak, offering his hand with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. On the dance floor, surrounded by swaying couples and soft music, Mary finally found her voice. "Daniel, who are you really?" He spun her gracefully, buying himself a moment before answering. "I'm exactly who I've told you I am." "No," Mary said firmly, "you're not. People don't just casually know half of Chicago's wealthiest philanthropists. They don't get last-minute tickets to exclusive galas. And they definitely don't wear watches that cost more than most people's cars while claiming to be volunteers at community centers." Daniel's steps faltered slightly, and Mary saw something vulnerable flash across his features before his composure returned. "Mary," he said quietly, "there are things about my life that are complicated. But I promise you, everything I've told you about caring about the community center, about wanting to help, that's all true." "But there's more, isn't there?" Mary pressed. Daniel was quiet for a long moment, and Mary could see him weighing his words carefully. "Yes," he finally admitted, "there's more, but I'm not ready to explain it all yet. Can you trust me just a little longer?" Looking into his eyes, seeing the genuine conflict there, Mary made a decision that would change everything. "Okay," she said softly, "but when you're ready to tell me the truth, I want to hear all of it." Daniel's smile was both grateful and sad. "I promise, you will, sooner than you think." As they continued dancing, neither of them noticed Victoria watching from across the ballroom, her phone pressed to her ear and her expression calculating. Whatever Daniel Rivers was hiding, Victoria Blackwood was determined to find out and use it to her advantage. Mary burst through the doors of the Riverside Community Center with barely contained excitement, her laptop bag bouncing against her hip as she hurried toward Patricia's office. It had been 3 days since the gala, and the response from potential donors had exceeded her wildest expectations. "Patricia," Mary called out, finding the director in the main hall organizing supplies for the after-school program. "You're not going to believe this." Patricia looked up from a box of art supplies, her weathered face breaking into a smile at Mary's obvious enthusiasm. "Let me guess, someone actually wants to help us?" "Someone?" Mary laughed, pulling out her phone to show Patricia the spreadsheet she had been updating all morning. "Try 15 someones. Margaret Henley committed $50,000. The Chen Foundation wants to fund the entire computer lab renovation, and there are 3 other foundations interested in long-term partnerships."
Patricia's hands flew to her mouth, tears springing to her eyes. Mary, this is a miracle. How did you manage all this in just 3 days? I had help, Mary admitted, thinking of Daniel and feeling that familiar flutter of confusion and affection. Someone who knew exactly which doors to open. As they sat in Patricia's cramped office, going over the preliminary commitments and planning next steps, Mary's phone buzzed with a text from Daniel. "Dinner tonight. I have something important to discuss with you." Mary's stomach tightened with a mixture of anticipation and anxiety. Ever since the gala, their conversations had carried an undercurrent of unfinished business. She knew he was preparing to tell her something significant, and she wasn't sure she was ready for whatever revelation was coming. "Go," Patricia said, noticing Mary's distraction. "Whoever helped you pull off this miracle deserves a proper thank you. And Mary, whatever happens with Sterling, know that you've already changed hundreds of lives here. That's worth more than any corporate promotion." Mary drove back to Sterling's offices with Patricia's words echoing in her mind. She had been so focused on proving herself to Victoria that she had almost forgotten the real impact of her work. For the first time in months, she felt like she was doing something that truly mattered. Her good mood evaporated the moment she stepped off the elevator and saw Victoria waiting by her desk, arms crossed and expression thunderous. "My office," Victoria said without preemptive. Mary followed her boss into the glass-walled office, her mind racing through possible explanations for Victoria's obvious fury. Had one of the donors complained? Had she somehow violated company protocol? "Sit down," Victoria commanded, moving to stand behind her desk like a general preparing for battle. "We need to discuss your recent extracurricular activities." "If this is about the community center campaign, I have excellent news," but Victoria cut her off with a sharp gesture. "Oh, I know all about your success with the campaign," Victoria said, her voice dripping with barely contained rage. "What I want to know is how you managed to secure meetings with some of Chicago's most exclusive philanthropists when you claim to have no connections in this city." Mary felt a chill run down her spine. There was something predatory in Victoria's expression, something that suggested she had been doing research. "I've been networking," Mary said carefully, "building relationships with people who care about community development." "Networking?" Victoria repeated mockingly. "Is that what you call seducing Daniel Rivers?" The blood drained from her face. "I don't understand what you're implying." Victoria smiled, but it was the smile of a shark sensing blood in the water. "Don't play innocent with me, Mary. I've done my homework. Your mysterious dinner companion isn't just some volunteer with good connections. He's Daniel Rivers, CEO and majority shareholder of Rivers Corporation." Mary's laptop slipped from her numb fingers, clattering to the floor. Rivers Corporation was one of the largest privately held companies in the Midwest, with interests in real estate development, technology, and renewable energy. Their headquarters occupied half a city block downtown, and their CEO was known for being notoriously private, rarely appearing in public or giving interviews. "That's impossible," Mary whispered. But even as she said it, pieces began clicking into place. Daniel's expensive clothes, his easy familiarity with Chicago's elite, his sophisticated understanding of business strategy, the way people had deferred to him at the gala. "Oh, it's very possible," Victoria continued, clearly enjoying Mary's shock. "Rivers Corporation is worth approximately $8 billion, making your boyfriend one of the wealthiest men in Illinois. And you had no idea, did you?" Mary's mind reeled as she tried to process this information. Daniel, her Daniel, who taught business skills at community centers and worried about authentic connections, was one of the most powerful CEOs in the country? "I can see from your expression that this comes as quite a surprise," Victoria said, settling into her chair with obvious satisfaction. "Which raises some very interesting questions about Mr. Rivers' motivations. Why would a billionaire CEO pretend to be a community volunteer? Why would he pursue a romantic relationship with a junior marketing associate? And most importantly, what does he really want from you?" Each question hit Mary like a physical blow. She thought about their conversations, their easy chemistry, the way he had seemed genuinely interested in her ideas and her background. Had it all been an elaborate deception?
Maybe he was just trying to help with the campaign, Mary said weakly, but Victoria's laugh cut through her words like a knife. Help with the campaign? Mary, wake up. Men like Daniel Rivers don't waste time on small-scale charity work unless there's something in it for them. Either he's playing some kind of long game that we don't understand, or— Victoria paused dramatically, letting the implications hang in the air. Or what? Mary asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to hear the answer. Or this is all some kind of elaborate joke, Victoria said cruelly. Think about it. What could be more amusing to a billionaire than pretending to romance some naive small-town girl, making her believe she could actually matter to someone of his stature? The words hit Mary like a sledgehammer. She thought about Daniel's mysterious smiles, his vague answers about his background, the way he had always seemed slightly amused by something she couldn't identify. Had she been the punchline to some cruel joke this entire time? "You're wrong," Mary said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Am I?" Victoria leaned forward, her eyes glittering with malicious satisfaction. "Then explain to me why Daniel Rivers would hide his identity from someone he claims to care about. Explain why he would lie to you about who he is and what he does. Explain why a man worth $8 billion would waste his time with someone like you." Mary couldn't explain it because she didn't understand it herself. The Daniel she thought she knew would never deceive someone he cared about, but the Daniel she thought she knew apparently didn't exist. "Here's what's going to happen," Victoria continued, her voice taking on a businesslike tone. "You're going to use this relationship, whatever it actually is, to Sterling's advantage. You're going to arrange a meeting between Mr. Rivers and our senior partners. Rivers Corporation could become our biggest client, worth millions in annual revenue." "I won't do that," Mary said firmly, finding her voice despite her confusion and hurt. "Oh, but you will," replied smoothly, "because if you don't, I'll make sure everyone in this industry knows exactly what kind of games you're willing to play to advance your career. I'll tell them how you seduced a billionaire CEO under false pretenses, how you manipulated him into supporting your little charity project. By the time I'm finished, you'll never work in marketing again." Mary stared at her boss in shock. "You can't be serious." "I'm deadly serious. You have until tomorrow morning to arrange that meeting, or you can pack your things and find a new career, preferably one that doesn't require professional references." Mary stood on shaking legs, her mind spinning with revelations and threats. Everything she thought she knew about Daniel, about their relationship, about her own success with the campaign, suddenly felt like a house of cards collapsing around her. "Oh, and Mary," Victoria called as she reached the door, "when you see Mr. Rivers tonight, you might want to ask him about his company's plans for the Southside Development Project. I think you'll find his interest in your little community center makes a lot more sense once you understand what Rivers Corporation really wants from that neighborhood." Mary stumbled out of Victoria's office, her heart pounding and her mind racing. She needed to see Daniel, needed to hear his explanation, needed to understand how everything she thought she knew about him could be so completely wrong. But as she drove through the Chicago traffic toward their dinner meeting, one question echoed in her mind above all others. If Daniel had been lying about his identity from the very beginning, what else had he been lying about? Mary sat across from Daniel at Alinea, one of Chicago's most exclusive restaurants, her hands trembling as she gripped her water glass. The elegant 3 Michelin-star establishment suddenly felt like a stage set for her humiliation. Of course this is where a billionaire would choose to have dinner. How had she been so blind? Daniel looked the same as always, perfectly at ease, genuinely happy to see her, his green eyes warm with affection. But now Mary saw him differently. The casual confidence wasn't just natural charm. It was the bearing of someone accustomed to power. The expensive watch wasn't an aberration. It was a glimpse of his real world. Even his choice of restaurants spoke of a lifestyle completely foreign to her own experience. "You seem tense," Daniel said, reaching across the table to touch her hand. "Is everything all right with the campaign? Did the donors follow through on their commitments?" Mary pulled her hand away as if his touch burned. "The donors are fine, better than fine, actually.
It turns out when a billionaire CEO personally vouches for a cause, people tend to take it seriously. Daniel went very still, his expression shifting from concern to something guarded and careful. "Mary, is it true?" she interrupted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Are you Daniel Rivers, CEO of Rivers Corporation?" The silence stretched between them like a chasm. Daniel's shoulders sagged slightly, and for the first time since she'd known him, he looked tired, almost defeated. "Yes," he said, quietly. "It's true." The admission hit Mary like a physical blow, even though she had been expecting it. Hearing him confirm Victoria's revelation made it real in a way that turned her stomach and brought tears to her eyes. "How long?" she asked, fighting to keep her voice steady. "How long were you planning to keep lying to me?" "I wasn't lying," Daniel said urgently, leaning forward. "Everything I told you about caring about the community center, about wanting to help, that was all true. I just omitted certain details about my background." "Omitted?" Mary's voice rose slightly, drawing glances from nearby tables. "You didn't omit details, Daniel. You created an entirely fictional persona. You let me believe you were some kind of volunteer when you're actually one of the most powerful men in Chicago." Daniel ran his hands through his hair, a gesture she had found endearing just days ago, but now seems like an affectation. "I know how it looks, but you have to understand. When people know who I am, everything changes. They see dollar signs instead of a person. They want something from me, always. So you decided to find out what I wanted by deceiving me, by making me trust you under completely false pretenses?"
It wasn't like that, Daniel insisted. "When I met you at that cafe, I wasn't planning anything. I was just taking a break from being Daniel Rivers, CEO. I go to places like the community center sometimes, places where I can just be a regular person for a few hours." Mary stared at him, seeing him clearly for perhaps the first time. A regular person? Daniel, do you hear yourself? You talk about being a regular person like it's some kind of vacation from your real life. People like me are just entertainment. "That's not what I meant," Daniel said desperately. "Mary, you're not entertainment. You're the most genuine, passionate, intelligent woman I've ever met. Being with you reminded me why I got into business in the first place, to make a real difference, not just to accumulate wealth." "Then why didn't you trust me with the truth?" Mary asked, tears finally spilling over. "If I'm so special, if our connection is so genuine, why couldn't you be honest with me?" Daniel was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was heavy with regret. "Because I was afraid you'd look at me the way you're looking at me right now, like I'm some kind of monster." "I'm not looking at you like you're a monster," Mary said, wiping her eyes with her napkin. "I'm looking at you like you're a stranger, because that's what you are. The man I thought I was falling for doesn't exist." The word falling hung between them, an admission Mary hadn't meant to make. Daniel's expression shifted, hope flickering in his eyes. "He does exist," Daniel said softly. "Everything between us has been real, Mary. My feelings for you are real." "But built on a lie," Mary replied. "How am I supposed to trust anything you say now? How do I know this entire conversation isn't just another manipulation?" Before Daniel could respond, Mary's phone buzzed with a text message. She glanced at it and felt her blood turn to ice. It was from Victoria. "Hope you're having a productive dinner with Mr. Rivers. Don't forget our conversation about Rivers Corporation's Southside development plans." Mary looked up at Daniel with new suspicion. "Tell me about your company's interest in the Southside." Daniel's face went pale. "What do you mean?" "Rivers Corporation," Mary said, her voice gaining strength as pieces began clicking together. "You have development plans for the area around the community center, don't you?" Daniel closed his eyes, and Mary knew she had hit the mark. "That's why you were really there," she continued. "Not to volunteer, not to help the community. You were scouting the area for development opportunities. And I just handed you the perfect opportunity to get close to the community leaders." "Mary, you don't understand." "I understand perfectly," Mary interrupted, standing abruptly. "I understand that I've been an idiot. You saw some naive small-town girl working on a community project and you thought, what a perfect way to gather intelligence in the neighborhood. Get close to the marketing person, learn about the community's weaknesses, and find out how desperate they are for funding. That's not what happened, Daniel said, also standing. Several other diners were now openly staring at their confrontation, but Mary was beyond caring about appearances. Isn't it? Mary challenged. Your company buys up struggling neighborhoods, doesn't it? Develops them into luxury condos and high-end retail spaces. And the Riverside Community Center sits on a prime piece of real estate that would be perfect for your next project. Daniel's silence was enough. My God, breathed Mary, the donations. All those wealthy philanthropists you introduced me to, they're not really interested in saving the community, are they? They're your business partners. They're investing in the area because you're going to develop it. Mary, please let me explain. Explain what? Mary's voice cracked with emotion. How you manipulated me into helping you destroy the very community I was trying to save? How you made me an accomplice in my own betrayal? She grabbed her purse and headed for the door, but Daniel caught her arm gently. Don't touch me, Mary said, jerking away from him. Don't ever touch me again. Mary, if you would just listen. I've heard enough, Mary said, turning to face him one last time. You know what the saddest part is? I actually thought someone like you could care about someone like me. I thought maybe Victoria was wrong about people like me not belonging in your world. But she was right, wasn't she? I don't belong in your world, because your world is built on destroying places like mine. She walked out of the restaurant, leaving Daniel standing among the elegant tables and crystal glasses, looking more lost than any billionaire had a right to look. Outside, Mary sat in her car for several minutes, sobbing as the full weight of her situation crashed over her. She had lost the man she was falling in love with, discovered that her greatest professional success was built on deception, and now faced the impossible choice Victoria had given her: betray Daniel to save her career, or lose everything she had worked for. As she finally started her car and drove through the glittering Chicago streets, Mary realized that her biggest battle wasn't with Victoria or Daniel. It was with herself. Because despite everything she had learned, despite the lies and the manipulation, part of her still wanted to believe that the connection she had felt with Daniel was real. And that, perhaps, was the most dangerous deception of all. Mary arrived at Sterling Marketing the next morning with dark circles under her eyes and a resignation letter in her purse. She had spent the entire night weighing her options, and every scenario led to the same conclusion. She couldn't remain at a company that valued manipulation over integrity, and she couldn't be Victoria's pawn in whatever game she was playing with Daniel. But as she stepped off the elevator, she was surprised to find the office buzzing with unusual energy. Employees clustered in small groups, whispering urgently, and several senior partners were gathered in the conference room with expressions of barely contained panic. Mary, her colleague Jennifer rushed over, eyes wide with excitement. Did you hear? There's been some kind of emergency board meeting. Victoria's been locked in her office all morning, and word is that someone's been asking questions about her client management practices. Before Mary could respond, Victoria's assistant approached with a tight smile. Miss Thompson, Miss Blackwood would like to see you immediately. Mary knocked on Victoria's office door and entered to find her boss standing by the window, her usual perfect composure notably absent. Victoria's designer suit was wrinkled, her hair slightly disheveled, and there was a wildness in her eyes that Mary had never seen before. Close the door, Victoria commanded without turning around. We need to talk. Mary did as instructed, noting the stack of legal documents on Victoria's desk and the expensive briefcase that clearly didn't belong to anyone at Sterling. It seems your boyfriend has been busy, Victoria said, finally turning to face Mary, with a smile that was more grimace than expression of pleasure. I don't know what you're talking about, Mary replied carefully. Don't you? Victoria laughed, but there was no humor in it. Last night, after your romantic dinner, Rivers Corporation's legal team contacted Sterling's board of directors. Apparently, they've been conducting a thorough investigation into our business practices, particularly regarding conflicts of interest and client manipulation. Mary's heart began racing, but she kept her expression neutral. What does that have to do with me? Everything, Victoria exploded, her composure finally cracking completely. They have documentation of our conversation yesterday. They know about my threats, my attempts to coerce you into arranging meetings under false pretenses. They even have recordings of my comments about your background and qualifications. Mary stared at Victoria in shock. Recordings? Your phone, you idiot, Victoria snapped. Rivers Corporation's security team informed our legal department that your device has been under their protection since you started dating their CEO. Every conversation, every threat, every degrading comment I made about you has been documented. The implications hit Mary like a thunderbolt. Daniel had been protecting her, gathering evidence of Victoria's behavior, building a case against Sterling's toxic practices. But why? Was this another manipulation, or was it genuine concern for her welfare? Here's what's going to happen, Victoria continued, her voice taking on a desperate edge. You're going to contact Daniel Rivers right now. You're going to tell him this was all a misunderstanding, that you were mistaken about the threats and coercion. You're going to convince him to drop this investigation. No, Mary said quietly. Victoria's eyes flashed dangerously. Excuse me? I said no. Mary stood straighter, feeling a strength she hadn't known she possessed. I won't lie for you, Victoria. I won't protect you from the consequences of your own actions. You little fool, Victoria hissed. Do you think Rivers actually cares about you? This is just business to him. He's using you to get leverage over Sterling, and when he's done, he'll discard you like yesterday's newspaper. Maybe, Mary replied calmly, but that doesn't change the fact that what you've done is wrong. The way you've treated me, the way you've treated other employees, the way you've manipulated clients, it all needs to stop. Victoria's face turned an alarming shade of red. If you don't help me fix this, I'll destroy you. I'll make sure you never work in this industry again. You already tried that, Mary pointed out, and look where it got you. Before Victoria could respond, there was a knock on the office door. Victoria's assistant entered, looking nervous. Miss Blackwood, there are some gentlemen here from Rivers Corporation. They'd like to speak with you. Victoria's face went white. Through the glass walls of her office, Mary could see 3 men in expensive suits waiting in the reception area, briefcases in hand, and expressions that suggested this was not a social call. Tell them I'm not available, Victoria said weakly. Actually, came a familiar voice from the doorway, I think it would be better if we talked now. Mary turned to see Daniel entering the office, but this wasn't the casual, approachable man she had come to know. This was Daniel Rivers, CEO, and his presence commanded the room in a way that made even Victoria step backward. Mr. Rivers, Victoria began, attempting to regain her composure. What a pleasant surprise. I was just discussing with Mary how we might arrange a meeting to discuss potential partnerships. Miss Blackwood, Daniel interrupted, his voice cold and professional. I'm here to inform you that Rivers Corporation will be terminating all existing contracts with Sterling Marketing effective immediately. We'll also be recommending that our partner companies reconsider their relationships with your firm. Victoria's face crumpled. Mr. Rivers, surely we can work something out. Mary and I were just having a friendly discussion about... I'm fully aware of the nature of your discussions with Miss Thompson, Daniel said, his green eyes hard as stones. In fact, I'm aware of a great many things about how you conduct business here. He turned to Mary, and for a moment, his expression softened. Miss Thompson, I have a proposition for you. Mary's heart hammered against her ribs. What kind of proposition? Daniel smiled, and suddenly she could see glimpses of the man she had fallen for beneath the corporate armor. Rivers Corporation is launching a new division focused on community development and social impact marketing. We need someone to head the department, someone with genuine passion for community engagement and the skills to build meaningful partnerships. Mary stared at him in disbelief. You're offering me a job? I'm offering you a chance to do the work you've always wanted to do, with the resources to make a real difference. The salary is 4 times what you're making here, full benefits, and complete autonomy over your projects. Victoria made a strangled noise of protest, but Daniel continued as if she hadn't spoken. The position would also include oversight of Rivers Corporation's charitable foundation, with an annual giving budget of $50 million. Your first project would be ensuring the Riverside Community Center not only survives, but thrives. Mary felt dizzy. Daniel, I don't understand. After last night, after everything that was said. After last night, I realized I should have been honest with you from the beginning, Daniel said, his voice becoming gentler. I should have trusted you with the truth about who I am and what my company does. You were right to be angry with me. He stepped closer, and Mary could see vulnerability in his eyes that reminded her of the man who had listened to her dreams over coffee and pasta. But Mary, I need you to know that my feelings for you were never part of any business strategy. Yes, I was initially interested in the community center area for development, but after meeting you, after seeing the real impact of the center's work, I changed those plans entirely. What do you mean? Mary asked. Daniel reached into his briefcase and pulled out a thick document. Rivers Corporation is donating the 3 city blocks surrounding the community center to a nonprofit trust, ensuring they can never be developed commercially. We're also establishing a permanent endowment fund that will support the center's operations indefinitely. Mary's legs felt weak. You're giving away millions of dollars in potential profits. I'm investing in something more valuable than profit, Daniel replied. I'm investing in the kind of community development that actually helps people instead of displacing them. Victoria finally found her voice. This is insane. Mary, don't let him manipulate you again. This is just another elaborate scheme. Miss Blackwood, Daniel said, without taking his eyes off Mary, I believe my associates are waiting to discuss the contract terminations with you. I suggest you give them your full attention. As Victoria was escorted from her own office by Daniel's legal team, Mary found herself alone with the man who had turned her world upside down twice in the spare of a week. Why? Mary asked quietly. Why would you do all this? Daniel stepped closer, and Mary didn't pull away this time. Because a wise woman once told me that merit should speak louder than breeding. Because you showed me that real success isn't about accumulating wealth, it's about using whatever power you have to lift other people up. He reached out tentatively, and when Mary didn't resist, he took her hands in his. Because I love you, Daniel said simply. Not as Daniel Rivers, CEO, but as the man who discovered that the most valuable thing in his life was sitting across from him in a neighborhood cafe, planning to save the world one community center at a time. Mary looked into his eyes and saw the truth she had been afraid to believe. This wasn't manipulation or corporate strategy. This was a man who had been transformed by love, just as she had been. So, Daniel said with a smile that was purely the man she had fallen for, what do you say? Ready to change the world together? Mary thought about Victoria's cruel words, about her small apartment and student loans, about the girl from Wisconsin who had been told she didn't belong in this world of power and privilege. Then she thought about Patricia and Miguel and all the families who would benefit from the community center's survival. She thought about the chance to do meaningful work, to prove that success didn't have to come at the expense of other people's dreams. Yes, Mary said, rising up on her toes to kiss the billionaire who had given her his heart and his company in the same week. Let's change the world. 6 months later, Mary stood in the renovated Riverside Community Center, watching Daniel teach a business skills workshop to a group of enthusiastic teenagers. Her engagement ring caught the light as she reviewed plans for their next community development project, and she smiled as she remembered Victoria's words about knowing her limitations. As it turned out, the only limitation had been her own belief that she didn't deserve extraordinary things. Love, success, and the power to make a difference weren't reserved for people with the right background or connections. They belonged to anyone brave enough to reach for them.
And Mary Thompson had finally learned that she was much braver than she had ever imagined. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.